Good evening, everybody on Zoom and in the room. Just waiting another minute here while we get some remote players in and center ourselves. Nice to see you all. Very nice to see you all. Well, here we are. Welcome to what is actually our final workshop in the history of material texts for the academic year. There was more to that sentence. For the academic year, 23-24. And as is customary and important, I think, at this last gathering for a few months, I first want to thank the participants in the seminar, which is to say everybody here in person, everybody on Zoom, everybody who has been a participant throughout the year in our interesting and sort of shape-shifting seminar. Our audiences change a little bit every week, and I think that's part of the pleasure of it. So thank you to all of you. Special thanks to Lila Goldenberg for all of her hard work as Bristol Schoenberg Fellow during the year, this year. She's the one who sends those emails. So Lila, thank you so much for keeping us all on top of our game. We can also welcome in advance next year's fellow, Peter Diamond. Peter's a PhD candidate in the English department and will be running the ship very soon. So look forward to some emails from Peter, but not an onerous number. And so those thanks come on behalf of myself and my co-organizer, Zach Lesser, who's over here, and Jerry Singerman, who is also at the table tonight. And just on behalf of all of us, we hope that you, the audiences, will continue to extend the reach and message and welcome of the seminar and recruit new audiences for it in the future.
We have been alerted that the Zoomers are getting a bit of an echo.
Okay, hold on, Zoomers.
Yeah.
What's that?
I don't know why. Check that.
Yeah.
Unless someone in the room has their audio.
Okay, Zoomers, keep us posted. Is that any different? Having no issues in the room, or is that it? Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for letting us know. So this has been a difficult year. I think we're all aware of that. Difficult year for this campus at other scales as well. There have been a number of tragedies of different kinds. Just acknowledging that, even though my words are really inadequate in the face of several things for which we are grieving together. Amidst that, despite that, we hope that this seminar has provided a kind of space for interdisciplinary discussion and investigation. This is, we like to think of this as our own version of connected histories, and we hope that the connections we're creating here can be enduring even in very uncertain times. And in what has become a kind of spring ritual for book historians, Tonight, we welcome back Roger Chartier to the podium. I will not rehearse his amazing portfolio of scholarship. Instead, I would like to focus, but very briefly, on Roger as a colleague and scholar citizen of our community. Edward Said wrote famously a work called The World, the Text, and the Critic. Roger might be said to exemplify the project of the world, the book, and the historian. His engagement leads him to range across countries, languages, and time periods, not only as a scholar, but as a teacher, an interlocutor, as listener, fellow traveler, and friend. We celebrate his kindness and generosity, as well as his always active, vital, and engaged presence in our communities here at Penn and far beyond, as I'm sure the Zoom will show tonight. He does come right from his undergraduate seminar, where I just saw him impress what we hope is a new generation of book historians and bibliographers, not just with erudition, far from it, but also with his deep engagement with their work and their questions. So now we'll turn to this rite of spring. Without, I think, Stravinsky's dancers in costumes, but with plenty of books in person for those of you here and on the screen, and perhaps even some music. Tonight's paper is entitled Books as Portfolios. Thank you, Roger, for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much for this generous introduction. And I think for the rite of spring, we can perhaps excerpt two of the dances, one which is the evocation of the ancestors, and the second one, which is, for us, the procession of the wise. My presentation today is only following up for three previous material text seminars presented during the spring term. The seminar by Joseph Howley on Roman wax tablets as archives. The seminar presented by Peter Stallybrass, either Wolfe and Ray Schrire on erasable writing technologies and their relations to literacy and numeracy in early modern Europe, and the seminar presented by Lila Goldenberg on books or library catalogs associating printed text and handwritten text in 16th century England. Before I begin a warning à la Magritte after Stravinsky. Ceci n'est pas un PowerPoint. The images shown on the screen must be understood more as the illustration in a book. I sent my presentation to John, and it shows the images that, according to him, will or must accompany this talk. In the beginning were the stacks, or the catalogs of the libraries that list numerous books called porte-feuille. The catalogs of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France mention 210 publications that between 1700 and 1799 had the word portefeuille in their titles. The majority of these publications were literary books that bound together poetic pieces, opuscules in prose, and mélange. Some of them claimed that they were printing text, text supposedly found in the portefeuille of an author, Montesquieu, du Laurence, Voltaire. In 1757, for example, Le Portefeuille Trouvé, ou Tablette d'un Curieux, was published as a 2 volumes collection of letters and fugitive pieces attributed to Monsieur de V, Voltaire, an authorship denied by Voltaire in a letter dated February 24, 1755. As regards this Portefeuille Trouvé, it is a rhapsody that a hungry bookseller named Duchesne sells in Paris under my name. It is a new robbery, un nouveau brigandage of the book trade. I am told that 3/4 of this collection is made up of pieces I have no part in them, and that the rest is plundered from editions of my works and entirely distorted, défiguré. Portefeuille can be also a title for almanacs. In 1787, Didot printed an almanach nécessaire ou portefeuille de tous les jours for the year 1788. A title for periodicals, for example, Le Portefeuille hebdomadaire, printed in Brussels by Baubers between 1769 and 1771, or a title for pedagogical works, Le Portefeuille des enfants is an encyclopedic work published in 20 installments between 1784 and 1797. At a more modest scale, Penn Library contains also its portefeuille, presented as publishing text kept together by a particular individual, le portefeuille de Monsieur L.D.F., 1694, le portefeuille d'un homme de goût ou l'esprit de nos meilleurs poètes, 1770, le portefeuille d'un exempt de police, 1785, or a portefeuille which was attributed to a fictional character like the portefeuille de Compère Mathieu, 1791, during the French Revolution. Hence, the first question, what was a portefeuille in early modern France? In 1680, for Richelieu's Dictionnaire français, a portefeuille is, I quote, a bookbinder's work composed of 2 sheets of cardboard covered with parchment or Morocco leather, with some embellishments of gilding on the cover. And he gave an example of use, un beau portefeuille. 10 years later, Furetière defined the portefeuille in his Dictionnaire universel as, I quote, a double cardboard covered with parchment, basane, or sheepskin, calfskin, Morocco leather, or brown chagrin, which opens and closes, and in which one can carry sheets, papers, prints without damaging them. More briefly, in 1694, the Dictionnaire de l'Académie française refers to the portefeuille as, I quote, a cardboard folded in 2, covered with skin or some fabric, used to carry sheets of paper. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word defined as a case or stiff folder holding papers, prints, drawings, maps, and so on, was directly borrowed from the French, but with different spellings in the example given by the dictionary. Porte-feuille in 1671, portefeuille without any separation between the 2 words, porte and feuille, in 1699, I quote the example, he showed his portefeuille in folio or red Spanish leather finely adorned, or porte-feuille with hyphen in 1756, attend me with my portefeuille and read while I dress those remarks I made in my last voyage. The 2 last quotations appeared in books dedicated to travels in France, as the word has crossed the sea. Portfolio in 1713, portfolio in 1713, or portfolio in 1781 avoided the French word for designating the same object. Books and portfolios were very similar objects. They were bound in the same materials, from modest basane to prestigious Morocco leather. They gathered sheets and leaves, and they held printed and manuscript text. It is a reason, perhaps, to take the designation of the book as portefeuille at its face value, and to consider the different documents inserted within some books, printed materials, handwritten text, and various things or objects. By welcoming them, some books, even without the word, became genuine portfolios or portefeuille. So first, printed materials within printed text. The presence in a book of printed matter that was not the pages of its text was first and foremost that of images. An essential transformation in the morphology of the book was a shift from woodcuts, which could be set in the same form than the typographic composition, and that could be printed in the same workshop, to copper plate engravings printed on a different press and in a different workshop, that of the, as said the encyclopédie, imprimeur en taille douce. The consequences of this shift were important. Copper plate engravings increased the cost of production and therefore the price of books. But above all, they implied the separation between images and text. In most cases, images had to occupy their own space, frontispiece, full pages, or text. Illustration thus becomes a supplement to the text. They show what the text cannot narrate. For example, the simultaneity of actions or events, and they can reveal meanings only latent in the written words. In true Derridian orthodoxy, the iconographic supplement often became a textual substitute, when the image fixed the work in memory and imagination, as it was the case, for example, with Don Quixote. Let us take an example coming from the stacks and the stacks of our library. Maps within the works of fiction are a particular example of the presence of printed matter in printed books. Their presence can take many forms that may appear as leaflets inserted in each copy of the edition. This is the case with the carte de tendre inserted on page 397 in the 1654 and 1660 editions of Mademoiselle de Scudéry's Clélie. This insertion is announced in the story itself. I quote, "At these words, Celer actually gave the map that follows this page to the Princess of the Léontin, who was pleasantly surprised." A pleasant surprise shared by the reader of the novel, who discovered in his or her book the map described in the text. This is also the case for the map of Spain, showing the itinerary of Don Quixote Tres Salidas, inserted in Madrid editions, published by Joaquín Ibarra for the Royal Academy in 1780 and 1782, and in the 1797-98 edition printed by Gabriel Sancha. Maps can also occupy entire pages of the book itself. This is the case with the island of Utopia, printed in the Louvain 1516 and the Basel 1518 edition of Thomas More's book. Or it is the case of Robinson Crusoe Travels, drawn on the map of the world that opened the fourth edition of the book in 1719. In some work, a map may accompany a text originally published without map. The Carte du Royaume d'Amour, map of the Kingdom of Love, was added to Tristan l'Hermite's text, published without map in 1658. And the Carte du Royaume de Coquetterie, map of the Kingdom of Coquetry, to Abbé d'Aubignac's text, printed without map in 1654. Both of these two maps were inspired, of course, by the Carte de Tendre in Clélie's, Scudéry's Clélie. A book also became a kind of portfolio of printed text when it brought together in the same binding several texts that have been printed separately and were associated by the will of the book's owner. Print culture has inherited from the age of medieval miscellanies the practice of bringing together in a single book a wide variety of text. As Armando Petrucci has pointed out, miscellanies were the dominant form of the manuscript book for all textual genres other than the works of the fathers and doctors of the church, the text of the ancient authority, or legal codex. Miscellanies remain essential in early modern times for the preservation of unbound pamphlets, always threatened by destruction in relation with the fragility. As shown by Jeffrey Todd Knight, the reasons for associating several printed texts in the same book refer to several modalities of intertextuality, in this case, material and not just discursive intertextuality. The first reason is thematic. In a volume dating from the 1630s, preserved in the Furetière Library, Shakespeare's first part of Henry IV and Shakespeare's Richard III are associated with 13 other plays, all devoted to the lives and death of sovereign or illustrious men. Intertextuality can also be related to genre, material intertextuality. In another Furetière Library volume, two plays are bound together: the late and much admired play Pericles, Prince of Tyre, Shakespeare, and The Queen's Arcadia, a pastoral tragic comedy by Samuel Daniel, whose name does not appear on the title page. In this case, is the tragic-comic aesthetics or genre and its possible political implication that may have associated the two texts. Finally, material intertextuality can be governed by aesthetics. In a book from the British Library, described by Jeffrey Todd Knight, Shakespeare's Rape of Lucrece is bound with 4 printed poems of Ovidian inspiration and with some handwritten love songs and erotic epigrams, an example of these hybrid books that bound together scribal and print publication. The book as a portable library remains a strong reality of the early modern age. For example, in 1698, a French translation of Las Casas' brief relation of the destruction of the Indies was published in Amsterdam under the title Relation des voyages et des découvertes que les Espagnols ont fait dans les Indes occidentales. The relation is broadly presented as a travelogue. I quote, "The preliminaries, the known countries of America are so well described that we have no doubt that it will be a pleasure to read." The pleasure to read Las Casas, it's problematic. This surprising generic attribution is reinforced by the publication in the same book of another travelogue, the Relations curieuses des voyages du sieur Montauban en Guinée, 1695. The two travelogues, with quotation marks, were printed with a continuous pagination, continuous signature, and constituted a single book destined to the amateur of the genre, travelogue. Some readers could also include a third text in his copy or her copy of this Las Casas translation. The third work, also published in Amsterdam in 1698 by the same bookseller Jean-Louis Delorme, was entitled L'art de voyager utilement. The work could or must be bound with the other two texts if the reader desired it. The publisher explained, "If we had received it a little earlier, we would have joined it to the Relation des découvertes et des voyages des Espagnols dans les Indes occidentales. But having judged that it could well stand alone, we have printed it in the same size, so that those who wish to join it may do so easily." This is what did the owner of the copy of the Relation present in our library. We can assume that books constituted as portable libraries or portfolios were more numerous than the contemporary collection suggests. In the 19th and 20th century, miscellanies were often unbound for separating the works of a famous author from their less canonical neighbors. Second, scribal text in printed books. The printed book became even more a portfolio when it included handwritten text. Their presence was facilitated either by the insertion of blank leaves between the printed pages or by the printed frames of some pages, offering blank spaces for writing, as did memorandum books and pocket diaries in England, or as shown by Lodovica Braida, almanacs and agendas in 18th century Italy, with a division of the page between different moments of the day, morning, afternoon, evening. Printed division of the page. In all Europe, some printed objects welcomed erasable pages. As shown by Peter Stallybrass' new research in the English National Archives, the new technology proposing leaves of parchment or paper coated with a mixture of gesso and glue that allowed to write with a stylus and to erase what had been written was developed in the Low Countries since the late 15th century. The essential data made by Peter for my argument today is the fact that, and I quote him, the great majority of writing tables were bound with printed materials. It was a case with the Dutch specie Birken in the 17th century, some of them being wallet bindings with small pockets on the front and back. It was the case with the well-known writing tables with a calendar for 24 years printed in London by Adams and Triplett between 1577 and 1628. It was also the case in 18th century France. Of course, as the Spanish Librillo de Memoria, the French erasable tables were not necessarily and always inserted into a printed books. In 1690, Furetière's Dictionnaire had an entry tablet. It is said of a small book carried in the pocket that has some leaves of paper or parchment prepared, onto which one writes with a stylus or a pencil what must be remembered. It is on such tablets, which are not associated to printed text, that clearly in Scuderi's novel drew the carte de tendre, the map of tender. I quote the 1678 English translation of Scuderi's novel. A pleasing fantasy entertained her thoughts. She imagined it would be delightful to others, and without any further consultation, she took the tablets and wrote, in fact, drew, that she had agreeably designed. And she so speedily executed it that in half an hour, she had completely begun and finished her designment. Clearly, tablets were not a book or a porte-feuille. However, later than in England, France also had its own Adams and Triplett, the 18th century Parisian bookseller and publisher Louis Charles Desnos. In 1770, the Journal des Savants celebrated the recent new Desnos invention. The article began recalling the wide circulation and use of the tablets. I quote, everybody knows that tablets are coated with a plaster prepared in such a way that one can write or trace with a needle what one wishes to preserve. These tablets have so far been found so convenient that few people do not have them, which is an interesting observation when you discover that quite none of these tablets was kept and conserved in the contemporary archives or library. But followed the article, the tablets that circulated were thick, rigid, and cannot be easily reused. Hence, the importance of Desnos' invention. I quote the Journal des Savants. He has made portable tablets of various sizes in the form of manuals or pocket booklets. These tablets are designed to be used in the classroom. They contain a needle or stylus. This is nothing other than a point of a singular metal, which makes the characters come out on this paper in a very legible and perfect way. But the writing can easily be removed with bread crumbs, French like bread, so that once the tablets have been purchased, they will be used every year. It will suffice to renew the almanac every year. As earlier, the Dutch or the English erasable tablet, Desnos tablet, could or must be associated with printed works, and particularly with almanacs. Indeed, Desnos, who presented himself as the libraire et ingénieur géographe of the King of Denmark and has published an enormous quantity of maps, inserted his erasable tablet within quite all his publications. In his Catalogue des almanachs et étrennes géographiques, published in 1771, the tablet economic because, said the prospectus, they can be reused, are inserted in different categories of almanacs. Almanach géographique, almanach parisien, almanach des postes. They are also inserted in books for accounting, petit barème ou livre des comptes faits, or in travel guides, petit indicateur fidèle ou itinéraire général. In 1783, Desnos' Catalogue général d'almanach announced 121 new books, and I quote, "All these novelties are bound in Morocco, adorned with prints or maps related to each subject, furnished with a table of losses and gains, or not, at the choice of the buyer, composed on a paper of his, Desnos, invention, as beautiful as that of Holland, on which one can write as distinctly as with a pen, with a stylus of a mineral adapted to these tablets and which makes their closing. It is possible to erase," said the text, "to erase the characters 15 or 20 times in a row with a small sponge soaked in water without altering the paper." Penn Library acquired recently copies of 4 Desnos publications, and they are here. The first one is a volume associating, as in a portfolio, a table d'escompte at 5%, calculating the amounts due at 5% interest for different sums over different periods of time, addressed to, I translate, merchants, bankers, cashiers, and all business people. Associated the table of the table d'escompte with the secrétaire des dames et des messieurs and its polyptic and economic, as said the text, erasable tablets. The secrétaire allowed to write and to erase according weeks and months, gains and losses. It allows to write and to erase the visits to make, the agenda of the week, appointments, thoughts, jokes, fugitive poems as epigrams or madrigals, conversation, addresses, and so on. At the end of the small book, some blank leaves without any printed frame allowed to write and erase ce que l'on désirera, what you will. The second Desnos book, published in 1785, bound together the Secrétaire des Dames, a calendar for 1786, and a poetic almanac adorned with prints representing 49 mythological gods, goddesses, or events, and refer to Ovid's Metamorphoses illustrated at the frontispiece. The title indicated, curiously, that the tablet allows to write during the night without light, and during the day with a stylus adapted to them, and to write what? Thoughts, memories, appointments, gallant notes, missives, pleasant speeches, and so on. The title page indicated that the tablets could be reused 10 or 12 times. In the third books, bought by the library, the erasable secrétaire and an annual calendar were also bound with another poetic almanac, Les Muses à Cythère ou Le Plaisir de toute saison, chansonnier français, published by Desnos in 1788, in an avis printed in this book, composed by chansons, romance, and vaudeville, and among them some by Marmontel or by Beaumarchais. Desnos acknowledged the competition of almanacs more or less similar to his own, he said, but he stressed that they were in fact very different by the choice of the engravings and songs, by the nature of the paper and the stylus, and by the elegance of the binding. To prove his claim, he invited the readers to come in his bookstore, Rue Saint-Jacques, at the sign of the Globe, related with this main activity as a publisher of maps, or to consult the catalogue of his almanacs, une petite brochure d'environ 100 pages, a small brochure of about 100 pages. The last of the Desnos books, recently, very recently acquired by the library, bound together 4 different printed objects. It is a good example of a book used as a small format portefeuille. The 2 first texts are the Almanach du Bon Français ou Bons mots et anecdotes de Henri IV, 88 pages, followed by the Parfait modèle orné d'estampes représentant les principales scènes de la partie de chasse de Henri IV, 28 pages with 12 engravings. The 2 texts, devoted to the most philosophe and the most popular French king, Henry IV, were advertised in the 1783 catalogue of Desnos almanacs. They associated a compilation of Henri IV jokes or apophthegms, a printed genre born since the beginning of the 17th century in relation with the popular king, with fragments of a play written by Charles Collet, created in 1764, very often performed with an immense success during the reign of Louis XVI. The 2 texts, printed text, with for one of them illustration, are followed by the 48 erasable pages of the Secrétaire des Dames et des Messieurs, divided into 10 pages for the days of the week, 24 pages for inscribing the gains and losses, incomes and expenses of each day of the 12 months of the year, and 14 pages left blank. Finally, in the copy of our library, the readers of Henry IV jokes and the possible user of the erasable tablets added a calendar, but a calendar for 1792. That is to say, 10 years after the publication of the almanac. Desnos tablets that possibly accompanied all his almanacs add another chapter to the longue durée of both erasable writing technologies and hybrid books that, like portefeuille, associated printed text, pages framed for receiving manuscript annotation, and free personal handwriting. Third and last part, things lost in books. Printed or handwritten texts inserted within or bound with printed books were not the only material that made a book a portfolio. Readers left many objects in the books they read or owned. To find them is not an easy task for historical investigation. It would suppose either description in library catalogs taking account of the objects that were found in their binding, or the examination of hundreds, if not thousands, of copies. Such research, possible, desirable, suggests 2 comparisons. The first one with 18th century Parisian police and judicial archives, where Arlette Farge, my friend and colleague, came across playing cards, feathers, fabric samples, or even a sack of wheat grain. The second comparison can be made with objects found by today's librarians in books borrowed from and returned to public library. The site found in a library books present a digital gallery of 616 objects encountered since 2013 by a librarian of the public library in Oakland, California, Sharon McKellar. Her collection gathered letters, notes, drawings, photos, pictures, lists, bookmarks. Some of these items were displayed in an exhibition held in Oakland's main library in 2022, and they are presented on Sharon McKellar's blog. She defined her collection as a storytelling device. I quote her, "You can look at an object, whether it is a photo or a scrap of paper, and you can think of all the possible people who might have brought that into our space, and why and how it got here, and what their stories are." The initiative received a very wide media coverage, with an article in the Washington Post, reports from CBS and NPR, an article in the periodical of 11 countries, among them in French West of France, during the year 2022. Sharon McKellar's initiative inspired comparable endeavors in various libraries. An article published in Montreal, the Montreal newspaper La Presse, on November 7, 2022, described the collect made by librarians of the Grande Bibliothèque de Montréal and the public libraries of Quebec City in the books returned by their borrowers when they arrived on the conveyor belts of the sorting room. The result is a more varied set of objects than those collected by Sharon McKellar in Oakland. Of course, postcards, photos, receipts, subway or plane tickets, post-its, notes, checks, but also bundles of banknotes, a passport, pencils, squares of toilet paper, various foodstuffs, misplaced denture, a fake mustache, condoms, or a bag of some white powder. One librarian indicated, not in relation with the last object I mentioned, one librarian indicated, "It is nice to see that people are making books their own, bringing them to life at home, and that they are part of their everyday life." As said another librarian, Sophie Burrell, the forgotten object, I quote, "tells a story of where the books went, where they were read, where the book has traveled. The colorful leaf inserted between the pages may evoke a pleasant walk in a park in autumn. Some bookmarks may be postcards sent from Greece that make us travel." A similar collection of objects found in books began in 2020 in the Bibliothèque Municipale of the quiet Swiss city of Vevey. In 4 years, 1,003 objects were collected: love letters, lottery tickets, photographs, postal cards, toys, banknotes, drugs, and condoms. Considered as historical documents about contemporary everyday life, all these objects will be deposited in the archives of the city of Vevey. The quest for things left in books is not limited to public library. The Library of the University of Virginia launched in 2016 an examination of every book in the stacks published before 1923. The main aim of this book tracers project was to collect marginalia of ordinary readers. But the result was also the discovery of many objects left in the books. Leaves in a Life of Abraham Lincoln, published in 1865. A lock of gray hair in an 1851 edition of the works of Lord Byron. Or teeny tiny paper doll clothes in the works of Sir Walter Scott, published in 1853. And what about our library, John?
So a brief interlude from me. For the people in the room, you can look at these afterwards to mention 4 examples of what could be, of course, many, many others. Perhaps the most spectacular is this first one from a recent donation by an optometrist. Here, a 1728 edition of Book of Canon Law with a cutout in the front board for a pair of spectacles. With the pair of spectacles that survive. Those spectacles are, we have determined, 18th century contemporary to the book itself. So that's a particularly dramatic example. A next example, more humble, a 19th century music book that actually was from the collection of Alma and Anna Mahler, with theater tickets, notes, and some leaves as well. Here's just a picture of one of her theater tickets, used probably as a bookmark. A third example from our massive cookbook collection is a cookbook with printed and manuscript recipes inserted. Quite a number, and probably by multiple generations of users. And the last example that I'll leave up for a few minutes is, of course, of pressed flowers. Here, a fern from a 19th century periodical called The Casket, which actually has poetry on flowers. A lovely pressed flower with some of the flower petal remaining in an 18th century work relating to the criminal statutes of Teresa of Germany. Strange juxtaposition. And finally, in a 19th century school book, many dozens of traces of plant material that are no longer surviving in the book itself, just leaving these odd shadows.
And some booksellers shared the librarian's passion for things found inside books. In Otago, in the state of New York, Michael Popek's independent bookstore collected such objects presented in his website, Forgotten Bookmarks, and in his scrapbook published in 2011, Forgotten Bookmarks, a bookseller's collection of odd things lost between the pages. Among his favorite things found inside books are Monopoly money, fabric sample, as in Arlette Farr's archives, keys, a marriage certificate found in 1850 Holy Bible, records, gun pellets in a book used as a target for shooting practice, recipes, photos, maps, and letters, but mainly, and too many according, flowers and leaves. He wrote, pressed leaves are by far the most common. I have actually stopped saving them. They are too fragile to keep. Some authors also were interested by lost things in books. In our article, The Strange Things I Have Found Inside Books, published in the Paris Review in 2019, Jen Stern indicated, many of the used books I buy have something left inside of them by their former owners. Traffic tickets, luggage slip, ticket stubs, grocery store receipts, a check for $375, participation ribbons for a sporting event or a dog show. All these strange things recalled Jen Stern of a painful experience when, as a student, she worked as a book cleaner in the basement of the Sterling Library at Yale. I quote her, "It is a strange but true fact that people who lurk around the library stacks are often disrespectful of the books. In fact, they apparently use the books as a target for their rage. This is a polite way of explaining that when my basement job was to clean human effluvium out of the books. I am not nostalgic for my days as a basement book cleaner, although the discount reading material I buy often has humanizing touches left between the pages. I have never come across a book as sold as the ones at the Yale Library. Finding things that may have been forgotten in the books in early modern time and not contemporary public or university library is a difficult task. But traces, they left these things behind them are possible to find. It is the case, for example, with the impressions of various objects on the pages of copies of Shakespearean quartos or folios found by Jean-Christophe Mayer. I quote him, "Among the traces of human presence and activity that the early edition of Shakespeare's bear, I have found in the 300 copies that I have looked at, buttons, bookmarks, pins, but also traces of a compositor's hair fallen on the page at the stage of printing, and later stains left by rusty scissors, keys, spectacles, coins, and even round stains left by various receptacles containing different beverages, including claret wine, and a variety of burns probably caused by sparks coming from a hearth or from someone smoking with the book in his hand. Impressions of scissors and spectacles are also the traces found by Peter Bliny in copies of the first folio. But Bliny introduced a difference between them. Spectacles were left in the book by its readers, whereas scissors, I quote Peter Bliny, and you can read on the screen, I think, even if it is not a PowerPoint, scissors are not used as reading aids sufficiently often to account for the frequency with which their outlines are found in early books. The person most likely to leave a pair of scissors in a book was the original binder. Establishing a corpus of material traces or textual and iconographic representation of things lost or left in books in medieval or early modern times would be a useful and perhaps enjoyable task. It could begin with the presence of flowers, inadvertently or intentionally left between the pages. Flowers are a language spoken by Ophelia, and in the 19th century, as shown by Brazilian colleague Alessandra Elfar in her book A Linguagem Sentimental das Flores, the sentimental language of the flowers, Manual of Civility, newspaper and magazine articles or novels taught the equivalence between flowers and feelings. Inserting a flower into a book is a frequent gesture charged with multiple meanings between inadvertence and remembrance, between regret and desire. A textual corpus from early modernity on until now might include not only Ophelia's rosemary, pansy, rue, daisy, or violet, but also the French poet and singer Georges Brassens in a song called La Petite Marguerite. I gave the French after the English, and perhaps we can listen to in the third moment. La petite Marguerite est tombée, singulière, du bréviaire de l'abbé. 3 pétales de scandale sur l'autel, indiscrète paquerette, d'où vient-elle? Sur la pierre d'un calvaire, il l'a trouvée, et l'a mise, chose admise par le ciel, sans embâge, dans les pages du missel. Non, le prêtre n'est pas traître à Marie, que personne ne soupçonne plus jamais la petite Marguerite. The little daisy has fallen, singular, from the abbot's breviary. 3 petals of scandal on the altar. Indiscreet daisy, where does it come from? On the stone of a Calvary, he found it and put it, something admitted by heaven, bluntly in the pages of the Missal. No, the priest is not traitor to Mary. May no one ever suspect the little daisy.
Sur la pierre d'un calvaire, il l'a trouvé, et l'a mise, chose admise par le ciel, sans embâche dans les pages du missel. Et l'a mise, chose admise par le ciel, sans embâche dans les pages du missel.
Conclusion. Maps or text, blank leaves, writing tables, handwritings, forgotten objects, all were elements constituting the materiality of the books, and all can contribute to our deciphering of the meaning and uses of the text, to the nonverbal elements, to quote Mackenzie, that give meaning to a text, format, typeface, layout, punctuation. They added various devices of material intertextuality. Their presence transformed the possible appropriation of the works, contributed to the mobility of the text, and left traces of the users of their readers. Hence, the necessity, perhaps, to consider books as archives, as portable libraries, and why not, as portefeuille. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, John.
The floor is open. Mert, first question.
Sorry, recently I was studying translations of American texts by Ottoman intellectuals, and they were doing that through French. And what I realized was they were introducing a different conception of time to their readers. And in your research, you found some text, like Secrétaire de Madame de Monsieur. They offered a text that they could divide by time and date, right? So it came up together with a certain conception of time and understanding of time. For the Ottomans, it was quite new for the late 18th century French users of these texts. So about the American context, we know it very well, right? People studied Franklin's autobiography and other texts, and Weber's famous discussion of about time and production and how it changed for Franklin first. For the French readers and also publishers, did they experience any sort of different understanding of time, desire to control time, and later it reflected on the publications because they offered a certain product to them? How did this demand among the reader that occur? What caused this?
It's about the relation to time.
Yeah, in the almanac, yeah.
Yeah. There are different temporality, I think, in this publication by Desnos, and which could invert the relationship between the printed text and the handwriting annotation. Invert because either it's considered that the material object is constituted by this possibility of reusing the same erasable page, and in this sense, the printed calendar or almanac at the end is something which could be substituted 1 year after another year. And so the main object is defined by the possible writing on erasable pages, or conversely, and it's a way to which he advertised all his production, to consider that you have your almanac of all the genre, and that you have added to this almanac the secrétaire, that is to say, the erasable tablet. And he said the two definitions are possible, and we have seen with the last books by Desnos bought by the library that in this case it was a long duration of existence of this secrétaire, which allows to add in 1792, during the first year of the French Revolution, enfin l'an 1 of the French Revolution, the calendar. And so this is the first possible inversion, which could be connected to what you say about the different temporality. What is interesting in the secrétaire is the fact that you have the day of the week, and you have the day of the month, of the week and the months, but of course without date. They are the structure welcoming the different form of what the reader want to write and after to erase. In a sense, it's a suspended time, which is filled by the experience time by the owner of the object. And this is interesting to see the 7 days, and after all the days of all the week of all the months, particularly for the gains and losses in the secrétaire. So, yeah, I suppose there is a lot of possibility to approach in terms of layering of temporalities, this kind of object. And also the relationship which exists between the different moments in which Desnos advertise a new publication and the duration of their life in its catalogue. We have some, he make a lot of catalog, and some are available on the site Gallica of the French National Library. And you can see this permanent advertisement, accumulation of new title, but which not necessarily make the disappearance of the previous one. Mm-hmm. So in this sense, it would be a sedimented or layered production by Desnos. Yeah, thank you.
Peter.
Thank you so much, Roger. It's a wonderful talk and so rich. I was trying to think about whether you could push it in two directions. One of which is that, in one sense, almost any, I mean, the Bible itself would be a classic example of a portfolio, because you talk about the books in the Bible, and you can actually buy Bibles either with the Old Testament and New Testament in England. You can buy them just with the Old Testament and New Testament pre-bound, or with the Apocrypha added, or with the Book of Psalms added, or with the metrical Psalms added, or pre-bound, and so that all of these would be a sort of range of portfolios in a certain sense. And so in that sense, one could perhaps expand the category to, and that's on the one hand, and someone like St. Jerome actually uses the word bibliotheca. He thinks of the Bible as a library. So it's not really a book, it's a library. Yeah. It's a collection of books, literally, which you can add and subtract depending on the one hand. And then on the other hand, what you were pushing towards, it seemed to me, was the portfolio as different technologies. So the very first thing you looked at was engravings, for instance, and are they part of a book, which is still a sort of bibliographical debate. Yeah. I mean, in strict letterpress bibliography, you don't include the engravings, you just do the letterpress. And I wondered if it was possible to go back to look at the image of le parfait modèle. So the image of, and the word before that as well. I don't know if that's possible to look at the parfait modèle, because the title page there is engraved. And so I was very struck by how many of the images of the small almanacs there. That one in the middle is engraved. Yeah, absolutely. And so the one on the left is letterpress. Yeah. So if you go back two more, one more there. Now the image on the right is also engraved. And so that's an engraving. That's really strange, because aren't these from the same book? Are they from the same book?
We'll check. There's an interesting and complicated mix of engravings and letterpress for sure in these things.
But it really strikes me there that where you've got is different technologies, not just for the not just for the images, but for some reason, and I don't quite know what the reason is, it enters into that's sort of that's expensive to do all this amount of engraving.
These are luxurious little things.
Yeah. And you can buy the Book of Common Prayer entirely engraved, the whole, literally a sort of miniature. This is the same period, the 18th century. They'll actually do these sort of miniature books. So I was just thinking that, I thought that was really interesting, that what you were opening up is a whole area of bibliography. The history of bibliography has said we can't consider engravings as part of letterpress books, but I mean,
that's what the whole game is here.
Actually, not include it when it's actually part of the text.
Yeah, no, it's two very important points. The second one could be also illustrated by the trajectory of the scores, which are shifting from to typographic technology. You have the character as the note you have to put already engraved stuff, or the invention in Paris, 16th century by Athenian. The character is a fragment of the staves and the note. And so you put one the other. And the evolution to what is the dominant form for the printing of a score, that is to say, engraved one, which allows to do the same thing, to engrave both the notes, the stuff, and the text, if there is a song or is also something sung. So this idea to reintroduce in an original manner the engraved writing or image or score. It could be a very suggestive analysis, because the market was dominated for the score in the 17th century by the publisher in Amsterdam, and all were practicing the engraved score. The first one is about, of course, the Bible could be. I don't want to follow you in this blasphematory utterance that the Bible is a portfolio. But what is at stake here would be more, it seems to me, the question not only for the Bible but also for the Bible, the difference introduced by Petrucci between unorganic and organic miscellany. That is to say, the tension that for him opposed the miscellany, that is finally a book as a portable library, but all the texts are organized according a use, a practice, a genre, a system of reference. And for him, in the early Middle Ages, was the shift from this, which was the organic miscellany, to unorganic miscellany, of course, in which the portable library, like perhaps the shelf in a library, could have a personal library could have different texts which are not united neither by the genre, not by the use, not by the language. And so this tension, he followed in the beginning of the early Middle Ages, could perhaps be used as a typological distinction between the construction of this miscellany. It's the reason why I borrow so much to King. Todd King,
Knight.
Not Knight.
Wrong chess piece. Yeah.
James Todd Knight, about this idea to find what could be a principle for material intertextuality. And here we are clearly in the domain of organic miscellany, because it's the same aesthetic, because it's the same genre, or because it's the same content of a parallel similar content. Where yes, you could have the inorganic, until what point what you describe of these different components of the Bible could be both, perhaps organic and unorganic, depend on the moment of the decision.
Let's go with Davida and then Zoom. Yes.
So building on this last question and also going back to an earlier question, there's kind of a sort of pressure, okay, that comes from binding things together.
Yeah.
And because once something is bound together, people think that there ought to be an order to it, or that it has a certain rhyme or reason to it. The rhetorician who studied the New Testament, George Kennedy, coined the expression letterizzazione as the process when something gets put into a book, the order and the sequence starts to take on certain meaning. And certainly this happened to the Psalms. And decades of work has been done to try to make arguments about why these Psalms are in this particular order, when they were originally, never. Similarly, a student of mine looked at a collection of Edgar Allan Poe pieces where they were individual things that were published in newspapers, and they were meant as hoaxes. And once you put them into a book with stories, people took them as fiction and didn't make any sense out of them. So there's this, and I don't know whether it's hardcovers, because I do think that hardcovers have a prestige that soft covers don't, or articles, journals don't. But I think that the portfolio idea that, yes, there are some that sort of willy-nilly get together and people put together the inorganic or whatever, but then they take on something if they get, maybe if this goes towards the Bible, that there's some, that order suddenly becomes fixed and it gets repeated because that's the way we've done it. And then it takes on this whole new interpretive velocity, momentum.
Yeah, it's a very important question, the order of the different components of miscellany, in a sense. Yeah, I suppose you can use, if you are in front of the printed text, the bibliographic criteria. That is to say, as the example I mentioned, and I suppose you show in your illustration, John, of this Las Casas translated into French, the continuous signature. And more than the continuous pagination, because sometimes the different component could have different pagination and start again with one. But if you have the continuous signature, it's clearly the order in which someone wanted to have this text put together. So it's a criteria that could be used for the printed text. For the manuscript text, I have no expertise of this, but it seems to me it's a little more difficult to decide what could have been an order, if an order existed, and if it is the plurality of juxtaposition of text could be without reference to any supposed orthodox rational order. As you said, could be distributed and circulated in the different installments or fascicle or choirs and so on. So I think it's very important because particularly if you think that it's a way for criticizing another interpretation based on something which was the result of the decision of someone. It could be the publisher in the case of the continuous signature. It could be the owner of different texts in print-bound miscellany. It could be a decision of a library, finally. Even if, as we have said often with John and Lynn, the tendency of the library was more to dismember what were the content of miscellany, particularly when you have, if you have your Shakespearean quarto in the middle of miscellany, it's, you can have it as a beautifully bound unity. And so the suppression of this printed miscellany is a loss, in a sense, for a moment in which these texts were conceived of belonging to a unit. Alors, it could be because they were the result of the owner and reader, or it could be a decision made by the library long time ago, as it's shown also in the book I mentioned. So, no, thank you.
Yeah, Jean-Michel.
Go back to the contemporary the French word, and also thinking of Bertolt Brecht and Dr. Benjamin, who wrote together the detective fiction, and the plot was around the time that they would put money in the books in the library. But today in French, porte-feuille only means wallet.
Yeah.
Why is that?
It's very because we have in the library a play of 1820s called Le Portefeuille. It's a vaudeville by a very prolific author I did not know until the moment we found it in the catalog. He has written hundreds of these vaudeville. And so we were in the uncertainty to know if it is a portefeuille like the portefeuille I described or the portefeuille I have in my pocket. And in fact, it's the second one. That is to say, since the beginning of the 19th century, there was a reduced definition, at least in the French views of the world, of the portefeuille. And because it's clear when on the scene, I inflicted to myself to read some of the passages of this vaudeville, and it is said he put the portefeuille in his pocket. And so it cannot be the portfolio as defined as the cardboard. And so I suppose perhaps it was always never in the dictionary of the 17th century, you have the definition of the portefeuille as we have. But in the beginning of the 19th century, the portefeuille could stay according to the traditional definition, but also have acquired the definition of to be put in a pocket. And we are the place start because they have found in this lost portefeuille a series of letters, and the plot can follow this. But what they said, he put in the pocket.
So the artist portfolio does not exist as a, no. In French, no. The artist portfolio in French, not some,
which is the main definition in the OED.
yeah.
It's always drawing, the print,
Not in French.
It could be, but it's not the main element in the definition. But of course, when they said you can have leaves and sheets of paper and image, stamp, prints, but it's not so directly connected. And I suppose it was a little, it's not the same thing to say portefeuille and to say portfolio.
Yeah.
And
Well, I suppose you need money to be primarily pieces of paper to make the portfolio a wallet. Before you would have a purse to carry.
Yeah.
Right. So it's made of metal. Can I ask also about people are always fascinated by objects found in books, and I mean, didn't know those websites, but that's very familiar with the thing people are most interested in about Shakespeare's books is like the glasses and the scissors found in them, and I just wonder why we like that so much. What's it? And then when you were talking about the map, there's something kind of similar, I think, with the map of Robinson Crusoe or the moment in Clelie when she says, and here's the map, you know, there's this mix, there's this shift of levels between the book and the world, or when that barrier is broken, there's something very thrilling about it to people.
Yeah, there are two questions. Why people were fascinated and why people had left this object in the book.
But I also don't believe, I never have bought the Peter Blaney argument. I don't believe binders, that's their job. I don't think they're
it always seems weird to me
to leave their scissors in the book, but you know,
the scissors.
Yeah, but people do read with scissors in their hand, mainly women who will have a big book open and be doing other work with scissors at the time. So I think those are evidence of women readers.
But you have to find also the trace of the needle in this case.
Or something.
I left the second question. I tried on the first one. Why? What was the fascination? Was it what people said? I quoted the librarian or the bookseller who are making this kind of collection. They have the idea that it is the giving life to the book in a sense. It's the fact that to find a human presence in the book, and I adore this Quebecan librarian. She said, thanks to this, we can travel. And so it's an immobile travel, but with the airplane ticket, the passport.
Sort of focusing on the more positive things found rather than the less savory ones.
I was struck by the fact that in Auckland, Sheila didn't find any object which were outside of the written culture or the iconographic culture.
So she said.
I don't know, perhaps in Auckland, people are left only this kind of things in the book. When you are with the Quebecan and with even the Swiss, there is the range of the things found is expanded. And they are not only belonging to the written culture. And also, I suppose the investment, if we are looking for the dead in the text and the dead in the book, so the living people in this case for the contemporary library, it's something which is not coming in a sense from the book, the author, the text. It's coming from the user, the owner, the reader. And we are interested by history of reading, but here it's to try to find a trace of dead souls, in a sense, through the gesture and the traces left by the gestures.
Phil, sorry.
This was very interesting talk that went in directions that weren't quite what I was expecting. You started out with a book that's called porte-feuille. Then you went to the dictionary definition of an object, porte-feuille. And then we ended up with a variety of books that were collections of things, or bound objects that were collections of things. I just found myself wondering about a variety of elements here. First of all, when do the titles with the word porte-feuille start to appear as book titles? And what is the relationship between that and the object of porte-feuille in the large sense? And where's the history of the object porte-feuille? I would imagine, but I could be wrong, that extends back into the 17th century or 16th century, especially 17th century, for print collections, among other things. That's one place where you would expect to find it. And I mean, I don't know if inventories of print collections, some of which is going all the way back to Columbus's, nephew or son, use the term porte-feuille or the equivalent or not, but prints were generally stored in things that you could put multiple pieces of paper. That also raises the question of whether a typical porte-feuille of that original sense is bound firmly in the same way that a book is. Maybe there's a difference between a porte-feuille being capable of slipping things in and out and pulling them out, and a book that is bound. And when that book was bound is called a porte-feuille, what does that mean? And then how does that, one's familiar with libraries that are filled with recueils factices, which is just different things bound together. Is there a difference between the use of the word recueil and porte-feuille in titles? Could it be the recueil that went much farther and porte-feuille is only picked up after print collecting becomes something of a social phenomenon that people will feel whether they know about and that adds a certain kind of prestige? I'm just wondering about all these things in the wake of that very interesting talk.
Yeah, of course, it was a play in the idea to detach the nature of a book receiving various elements, scribal, printed, or material, and the strict definition, even with the portfolio in English or the portefeuille in the French dictionary. And of course, starting with the idea that some books were called portefeuille, the idea, the hypothesis, it's spring seminar was to show that all the books, some books were also could be considered as portefeuille, but no more in relation with the strict lexical definition of what was a portefeuille. An extended meaning, metaphorical or poetic meaning of portefeuille in order to consider that the discussion about the miscellanies, the discussion and the fascination for the object within the books, the discussion about the presence, as said Peter, of iconographic materials, which suppose more and more specific form of printing. All this could be not transformed, but approached with the idea of the book as portefeuille, and the homology be starting with the materiality. When you have the description of the portefeuille as a result of the work by a binder, which is the first definition by Richelieu, it's also what happened with the book, if it is bound. So starting with morphological similarities, I perhaps excessively extended the notion of portefeuille in order to show that we cannot reduce the definition of what is a book to the printed work, which is identified to the book. And this modern association between one name one work, one object was, of course, the result of some historical evolution, but was not relevant for all the material object we call books for the 16th, 17th, 18th century. So it was a little this idea, but I don't make a very strong conceptual construction of all the books are portefeuille or all the portefeuille are books. But starting with the similarities in the description, I was, and also because, as I said at the beginning, in the seminar, we are during this year hybrid books with Lila. We have erasable pages within the printed text, and we had the question of the erasability between the archive and the oblivion. And so it was also the reason inspiring this, that to have with this idea of portefeuille, something which could cross different topics discussed this year.
Yes.
Yes.
Would be to think about recueil is interesting, and maybe you know, because that word is around in the 18th century too. Sorry, a Zoom question from from Bianca. Please go ahead, Bianca.
Hello. I'm following up on this question of raccolta with a question about whether you have found any instances of miscollations. The work that I'm currently researching is called a raccolta, and it's a collection of a number of different poems around a theme, and it exists in 3 copies, 2 of which are bound with other things, according to the types of categories that you brought up, that someone at some point thought were relevant. The only copy that exists unbound with anything else was conserved about 10 years ago, and the conservator misbound the signatures that did not have any indication of where they should go. In one case, basically put 2 poets who are known as stesso autore, the same author, and put them in the wrong order. At least I think, because the other 2 have them in the other order, and it kind of makes sense. But there's no catchword. There's no signature number at the bottom. So this is just to ask, first of all, I think that the idea of the fixity of the book, you're absolutely right. To go back to the beginning, you had to keep you had to get the signatures to be in order to finally bind them. But then what's to keep them in order when you take them out again? And so the history of the book is also a history of uncollating, perhaps, as well as binding and collecting. And have you found any other instances of that within a book where it becomes a portfolio?
And what is the date of the raccolta that you're studying?
It's 1571, Venice. Yeah. But raccolta is a very common term in Italy, as recueil is in French, and so with multiple meanings.
Yeah. I suppose that it could be a way for introducing for the first category we discussed the concept or the notion of recueil, raccolta, mélange in a certain sense, in which the composition of a book on the basis of a series of printed text could have much more flexibility and a variation that we can suppose. In this sense, the collation of the signature, even if there are some mistakes, could be an instrument, and beyond this, the strict analysis of the composition of this recueil, mélange and raccolta. But it was just the beginning, of course, because this could belong to a bibliographical approach, which tried to show clearly that the description of the book is quite never confirmed by the examination of the actual copies. And we are always saying this with John, even immediately when you have some copies, you see that something that you expected and you have read is not working. And so this specificity of each copy, not only according to the bibliographical tradition of the possible variation, textual variation, but also with the composition and sometimes destruction of something which has been composed, created this plurality of situations. From this, I wanted to go to the other form of association between scribal text and printed text, and finally to introduce the idea of the flower in the book. But you are absolutely right. I think there is a lot of things to do more about the notion itself of recueil, of récolte, and also in all the language, what could be the designation of a composite book made by elements which could have been thought of as components of a unity, or could have been decided by an intervention, whatever it may be, to be put together and to make a book. And this plurality of situation, yes, it's just a call for the material text.
Lynn.
I was just going to follow up on what you said, Roger, because oftentimes engravings will be in different places when they're bound into books, but also paratext. Sometimes, things at the beginning of the book will not end up, they may have been printed separately, they may end up in different places when they're bound. So we see a lot of that kind of thing happening, in books themselves, that the binder may put something in a place. One binder might put it in one place and another binder might put it in another.
Yeah, it could be the use of the concept of portefeuille detached of the definition, but used for designating the mobility of the composition of what we could understand as being one book, a book, the book. And so in this sense, it's an effect of this category, not more respected in its literality, but just for indicating this mixture of text you can find in the same.
And one question I have about this note is, was he really conceiving of each of these hundreds of different things as something fixed, or could a buyer mix and match and choose to a certain extent what was in a book? And how, if we can possibly know this, it's hard to know, but you
want to say the printed components of the book, or
that to some extent in the Desnos world, a buyer could
it could add separate the calendar, and I suppose there is a multiple association in Desnos production between. We have example here, but I am quite sure you can find the two texts on Henry IV separately or independently, located within the different edition of the Secrétaire and so on. It's like Lego publishing in the sense. You can have unit you can put together, and he was a great master of this. It would be very interesting to have an inventory of the existing copies of this almanac by Desnos, and to discover the great variation of the content.
Final word from Peter, please.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to go back to Zach's, question about the way in which the world enters into the book, and then vice versa, the way the book goes out to the world. And I was thinking that I was very interested by the collector who said that leaves and flowers are far and away the most common things to find in books, and that when you think about leaves and flowers, they have a specific historicity. In other words, that oddly enough, linguistically, they're everywhere in classical antiquity. You've got anthologies, you've got Florilegia, you've got this whole notion of collections of flowers. You've got the whole notion of the Sibyl's leaves scattered and being bound together. But the paradox is that they didn't have any leaves in books because before the Codex, the actual scroll is made with membranes. So it doesn't have any resonance, I mean, it has resonance, obviously, but only poetic resonance.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any material resonance. But when you actually get to Petrarch, he talks about his poems as scattered rhymes, it's there you actually are thinking about leaves as scattering. And one of the things, that interests me is that, which I know you've written about too, is that how often you find marginalia, commonplacing in the form of flowers. One of Ben Jonson's typical marginalia is a flower. Again and again. So it's like, what you do with that is the commonplace is what you're going to take out of the book into the world. But vice versa, what you're doing with the world is taking flowers and leaves and putting them in and pressing. So you've got this sort of doubleness there of, particularly for flowers and leaves, but with a specific regime, which is the regime of the Codex. So it's not completely ahistorical. It's a huge history, obviously. But my suspicion is that from very, very early on, that people were collecting flowers and leaves, and I suspect as early as you've got codices. And the other thing, just to say about this, it's going to pose a problem for John and Lynn and and Nell and anyone working in libraries, because the question is, should you catalog?
Right.
And in one sense, it's going to become increasingly important because now that we have new kinds of scientific testing, we can actually start to look at a history of hybridization, which we're doing already with animals. But now we can look at it through flowers. You can look at, we should be able to date eventually what you find there. And so it's not necessarily, it might be interesting for readers, tell you the date that someone read it, but I think it's going to be much more interesting for someone like Karen Reed to actually examine the history of plants and how the history of plants has changed. So it really is, it's going to be a major archive, just as we're finding now that the library is the best place to study the history of animals, which we would never have thought, much better than the other. Bones give you so much less information than any library, and leather and parts, are going to give you this history, which they're doing already. But I'm suspecting that we're going to get huge histories in the long term out of the plant material.
I am a little afraid by all these animals in the library. I prefer the flowers in a sense. But what is interesting, what you mentioned, was the fact that, in a sense, the metaphor was before the materiality. There was this use of the flower for as the title for anthology in a moment in which it was impossible to put any material flower in the book. And after, there was an inverted situation in which, of course, remained a lot of books which has as a title flowers, and at the same time they could have within their pages some flowers concept. So yes, this is an interesting observation, and I hope we can have perhaps a research about this flower in the book. John has started. He found the traces of and the presence of some flower in the library. And well, it's good to end with Ophelia.
Yeah. So shout out to one person on Zoom, was Nina Musinski, from whom we acquired 3 out of 4 of these Desnos titles. So thank you for being here, Nina. And thank you all for a great semester and a great evening. Please feel free to look at these books if you're here, and thanks. And we'll see you all soon.
Sure.
Yeah. Would you like to have a